They say after 25 years of marriage, you know your partner inside and out. You know their quirks, their strengths, their weaknesses, the way they take their coffee and the exact moment their smile turns forced. I thought I knew Linda that well. I thought we had survived the kind of things that would break most couples. Job losses, family deaths, sleepless nights when the kids were sick, all of it. We had done it together, and I was proud of that. Proud of our life. Proud of what we'd built. I never once doubted our marriage. Not really. Sure, things weren't perfect. We had fallen into a routine, and maybe the romance wasn't what it used to be. But I figured that was normal for a couple our age. It's hard to keep the fire going after decades together, especially with life throwing obstacles at you every step of the way. Emily, our daughter, had recently moved back home after finishing college. I'll admit, having her back under our roof had been a nice change of pace. Her energy lit up the house, and I found myself enjoying her company in a way I hadn't expected. She and Linda seemed closer than ever, laughing at inside jokes I wasn't in on, spending late nights talking in the kitchen. At first, I was just happy to see them bonding. Emily had always been closer to me when she was younger, but as she grew into adulthood, her relationship with her mother deepened. It felt good to watch them reconnect. Then one day, Emily came to me with a suggestion that seemed thoughtful and innocent enough. "Dad, Mom's been under so much stress lately. I think she needs a break," she said. "You're always working, and I'm home, so why don't I arrange a weekend trip for her? A nice spa retreat, some time to relax on her own. I'll take care of everything." I remember smiling at her, thinking how sweet it was. Emily had grown into a compassionate, caring young woman, always looking out for her mom. "That's a great idea," I said. "She really does deserve a break." Linda's face lit up when Emily told her about the trip. For a second, I saw the old spark in her eyes, the excitement she used to have when we planned spontaneous getaways in our younger days. She hugged Emily, thanked her profusely, and started packing immediately. The plan was for her to leave Friday afternoon and return Sunday night. Emily handled all the arrangements, even booked a luxurious little boutique hotel out of town. "Just a bit of pampering," she said with a grin. What stood out to me, though, was how insistent Emily was that I shouldn't come. "It's a mom thing, Dad. She needs some solo time to recharge," Emily explained. "Trust me, it'll be good for her." I laughed, shrugged it off, and agreed. All right, you two win. Have fun." Looking back, I wish I had questioned it more. I wish I had seen the cracks forming beneath the surface. But hindsight's a cruel teacher. Friday came, and Linda left for her weekend trip. She gave me a peck on the cheek, a half-hearted kiss that barely registered, and said, "See you Sunday." Her voice was light, but there was an edge to it that I couldn't quite place. The house felt strange without her. Quiet. Too quiet. Emily had plans with friends that night, so I found myself alone for the first time in a while. At first, it was kind of nice, peaceful, even. I had a beer, watched a movie, and enjoyed the rare solitude. But as the hours ticked by, a strange unease started creeping in. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Linda deserved this trip. She'd worked hard for years, managing the household and taking care of everyone but herself. A weekend away was a good thing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Saturday morning came, and the uneasy feeling was still there, lingering like a bad taste in my mouth. I found myself wandering around the house, tidying things that didn't need to be tidied. I ended up in the kitchen, where Linda had left her phone plugged into the wall charger. It wasn't unusual for her to leave her phone behind when she was home. She'd been doing that for the past year or so, saying she wanted to unplug during family time. It seemed like a healthy habit. But now, staring at her phone on the counter, I felt a strange pull. I picked it up. The screen lit up, showing a lock screen filled with notifications. At least a dozen missed texts. From JS. The name meant nothing to me at first, but it gnawed at the edge of my mind like something familiar I couldn't quite place. I clicked on one of the notifications without thinking. The message read, "See you soon, love. Can't wait for our weekend together." I felt the air leave my lungs. Love. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the thread of messages. My heart raced as the truth unraveled in front of me, piece by piece. The messages went back weeks, no months. Romantic exchanges, secret plans, weekend meetups. The kind of messages you send when you're in love with someone who isn't your husband. But the most painful discovery wasn't just the affair itself. It was the fact that Emily had orchestrated the entire trip for them. For a few seconds after reading that message, I stood in the kitchen paralyzed, trying to process what I had just seen. See you soon, love. The words repeated in my head like a relentless drumbeat. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Couldn't be true. I refused to believe it at first. Maybe I was misinterpreting something. There had to be an explanation. Maybe this JS was just a close friend, and their messages were, I don't know, playful? But as I scrolled further, the truth became impossible to ignore. There were dozens of texts, romantic confessions, plans for meetups, references to past weekends. And the kicker, Emily says everything is set for Friday. Can't wait to finally have a full weekend without having to sneak around. Emily, my daughter, our daughter. My blood ran cold as I read those words. My mind scrambled for answers. Was Emily just covering for her mom, oblivious to what was really happening? Or was she an active accomplice in all of this? I felt like my world had been yanked out from under me, leaving me suspended in a free fall. I sat down at the kitchen table, still clutching Linda's phone, and tried to think. I could confront her right away, call her, demand an explanation, but something held me back. A small, nagging voice in the back of my mind told me not to show my cards just yet. If Emily was involved in this, I needed to know how deep it went. The rest of Saturday passed in a haze. I couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. Every time I glanced at the clock, I wondered what Linda and JS were doing right that very moment. By evening, I decided I couldn't wait until Sunday night for answers. I needed to get ahead of this before they came back and spun some carefully crafted story. I called Emily. Hey, sweetheart, I said, doing my best to keep my voice calm. You got a second? Of course, Dad. What's up? I was thinking about the trip you planned for your mom. Pretty nice of you to go all out like that, I said, keeping my tone casual. Where did you end up booking her stay? There was a pause, just long enough to raise my suspicion another notch. Oh, it's this little place out in the country, she said. I found it through a friend. Really secluded, great spa. Why? No reason, I said, my pulse quickening. Just curious. Everything okay? She asked, her voice edged with just a hint of nervousness. Yeah, everything's fine. Enjoy your night. We hung up, and I sat there for a moment, letting the conversation replay in my head. Emily was lying, I was sure of it. Her hesitation, the way she carefully avoided giving too many details. It all confirmed what I had suspected. Something about this weekend getaway wasn't right. Later that night, I sat down with Linda's laptop again, determined to find more answers. The emails from JS were still open, so I started digging deeper. I scrolled through the old messages, noticing patterns I hadn't seen before. Most of their conversations were brief, plans for meetups, check-ins, but every now and then I'd find longer exchanges. One message stood out in particular. We'll have to be more careful this time. The last thing we need is him getting suspicious. Emily's been a lifesaver. I don't know what we'd do without her help. Careful this time? What did that mean? How long had this been going on? The more I read, the more questions piled up. There were references to secret rendezvous, cryptic mentions of missteps in the past, and subtle jabs at me that made my blood boil. Then, near the bottom of the email chain, I found a document attachment labeled Getaway Plans _ Details, PDF. I opened it, expecting to see a hotel itinerary or something similar. What I found instead made my heart stop. It was a detailed plan for the weekend, locations, times, even prearranged excuses in case something went wrong. The level of planning was meticulous, almost clinical. But what caught my eye was the address listed for their final destination. It wasn't a spa. It wasn't a hotel. It was a private house in a nearby town. A house I didn't recognize. My mind raced. Was this JS's home? Some kind of hideaway? And why would they need Emily's help to get there? Something about this went far beyond a simple affair. This was a coordinated effort. By the time Sunday morning rolled around, I had made a decision. I was going to that house. I didn't know what I'd find there, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. I told Emily I was heading out for the day and drove to the address listed in the email. It took me about an hour to get there, my heart pounding the entire way. The house was tucked away on a quiet street, surrounded by tall trees. It looked ordinary enough, nothing suspicious at first glance. I parked down the street and watched for a while, trying to gather my nerves. Then, just as I was about to get out of the car, the front door opened. Linda stepped out, laughing. Her hair was down, and she looked more carefree than I'd seen her in years. She wasn't alone. A man followed her out, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident swagger. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulled her in close, and kissed her. JS. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was real, all of it. But before I could react, something else happened. Something that made my blood run cold. Emily stepped out of the house behind them, smiling as if she were part of some happy family reunion. For a moment, I sat frozen in my car, watching the three of them as if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate universe. My wife, my daughter, and him, all together, laughing, carefree. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything I believed about my life. I fought the urge to storm out of the car and confront them right then and there. My heart screamed for answers, but my head knew better. This wasn't the place or the time. Not yet. I needed to play this smart, and if Emily was involved as deeply as it seemed, I had to be careful. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The video was shaky, but it clearly captured Linda wrapped in JS's arms, and Emily smiling like it was a family reunion. They stood outside the house for a few minutes before getting into JS's car and driving off. I followed at a safe distance, every nerve in my body on high alert. They drove across town and pulled into a small, upscale restaurant. I parked down the street and watched from my car as they went inside. My pulse was hammering in my chest, and it took everything I had not to go in after them. Instead, I waited, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. How had this happened? Why was Emily helping her mother cheat on me? What had I done to deserve this level of betrayal? It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the deception, the lies, the fact that my own daughter, my baby girl, had orchestrated the whole thing. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, waiting for them to come out. When they finally did, I started recording again. They were still laughing, still oblivious to my presence. I followed them back to the house, my anger building with every mile. By the time they pulled into the driveway, my hands were trembling with rage. But I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I went home and started preparing. If I was going to confront them, I needed to do it on my terms. I spent the rest of the night gathering evidence. Emails, text messages, screenshots of Linda's phone records. By the time I was done, I had a mountain of proof. Enough to expose everything. Sunday night came, and I waited for Linda to return. She walked through the door around 9 p.m., wearing that same carefree smile. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened and asked how my weekend had been. Uneventful, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't seem to notice the tension in my tone. She went into the kitchen, humming to herself, and started unpacking her bag. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. "So," I said, leaning casually against the counter, "how was the spa?" She froze for just a fraction of a second before turning around with a forced smile. "It was great, really relaxing." "Oh, that's good to hear," I said, nodding. "Must have been nice to get away for a bit." "It really was," she said, her voice a little too bright. "I feel so refreshed." I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between us. "You know," I said finally, "I drove out to that spa earlier. Thought I'd surprise you." Her eyes widened just a fraction, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, you didn't need to do that," she said with a nervous laugh. I was probably in the middle of a massage or something. No, I said, stepping closer. You weren't there. In fact, I couldn't find any record of a reservation under your name. Funny, right? Her face went pale. I don't know what to say. They must have mixed something up. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. Don't lie to me, Linda. I know everything. For the first time, her facade cracked. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, showing her the video I had taken outside the house. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched herself wrapped in JS's arms. Who is he? I demanded. Her lips trembled. It's not what it looks like, she stammered. Please let me explain. Explain. I snapped, my voice rising. Explain how you've been sneaking around with him for months? How you've been using our daughter to cover for you. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was too far gone. And Emily? I said, my voice cold and hard. How could you drag her into this? What kind of mother does that? Linda shook her head frantically. No, you've got it all wrong. Emily didn't know what she was doing. She was just trying to help me get some space. She had no idea. Stop lying. I roared. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I stood there, watching her crumble, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and heartbreak. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The weight of the silence in the room felt crushing. Linda was still crying, but my mind had already shifted gears. This wasn't just her betrayal, it was Emily's too. And I couldn't walk away from this without confronting both of them. I stepped back, trying to steady my breathing. We're not done, I said, my voice low and firm. Not until I've heard everything. But first, I'm going to talk to Emily. Linda's head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. No. Please, don't drag her into this. She's already in it, I barked. You made sure of that. I turned and walked away, leaving Linda standing there as I marched down the hall toward Emily's room. My heart was thundering in my chest. I knocked once. No answer. Emily, I called, knocking again, harder this time. We need to talk. I heard movement inside, the shuffling of feet. Then the door opened a crack. Emily peeked out, her face cautious. Hey, Dad, what's up? I pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it behind me. Emily's room was tidy, filled with little touches that made it feel like her space. Photos on the walls, books stacked on her desk, the faint scent of vanilla from a candle burning on her dresser. I wished in that moment that I didn't have to do this, that I didn't have to break this fragile illusion of normalcy. But there was no going back now. Sit down, I said, my voice calm but unrelenting. We need to have a serious conversation. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door. Dad, is this about Mom? You tell me, I said, folding my arms. What exactly did you arrange for her this weekend? Her face went pale. It was just a spa trip. I thought she needed a break. Don't lie to me, Emily, I said, my voice sharpening. I know where she really went. I followed her. I saw her with him. And I know you helped set it up. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For a moment, she just stared at me, caught between panic and calculation. Then, something in her shifted. The innocent daughter I thought I knew disappeared, replaced by someone far more composed, far more calculating. Okay, she said, crossing her arms and tilting her head slightly. You want the truth? I nodded. Every word of it. She sighed, sitting down on the edge of her bed. I helped her because she needed an escape, Dad. You don't know what it's been like for her these past few years. What do you mean? I asked, narrowing my eyes. She's been unhappy, Emily said carefully. For a long time, she felt trapped, like she couldn't breathe. JS made her feel alive again. I just wanted her to be happy. I shook my head in disbelief. And you thought this was the way to do it? Helping her sneak around behind my back? Lying to me? I didn't want to lie to you, she said, her voice softening. But I had to. You wouldn't have understood. I could feel my anger bubbling to the surface again. You're damn right I wouldn't have understood. I've been breaking my back to give this family everything. And this is how you repay me. Emily flinched, but she didn't back down. It wasn't about you, Dad. It was about her. She was suffocating. I paced the room, running my hands through my hair. This was too much. Too twisted. And what about him? I asked finally. Who is JS? How did they meet? Emily hesitated again, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. They met a long time ago, she said carefully. Before you even knew. My heart sank. How long? Years, she admitted. They've been reconnecting for the past year, but they knew each other before. From her past. I stopped pacing, the room spinning around me. This wasn't just some random fling. This was someone from Linda's life. Someone who had resurfaced after all this time and stolen her away from me. Why didn't she just tell me? I whispered. Why didn't she just leave if she was so unhappy? Emily looked down at her hands. Because she didn't want to hurt you. She thought she could have both. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, she failed spectacularly at that, didn't she? The conversation left me reeling. I walked back into the living room, where Linda was still sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. She told me everything, I said, standing over her. So now it's your turn. Who is JS? How long has this really been going on? Linda looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. He's an old boyfriend, from before you and I met. We lost touch for years, but then we ran into each other at a conference last year. One thing led to another. Her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said. It just did. And once it started, I didn't know how to stop. I clenched my fists, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, love, hate. They all swirled together, leaving me breathless. Is this what you want? I asked finally. Him? A life of lies and sneaking around. She shook her head violently. No. I don't know what I want. I just know that I've been lost for a long time. I leaned in, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Then you'd better figure it out fast. Because after this, there's no going back. Not for us. Not for this family. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. I sat in the living room, staring at the wall, replaying every moment from the last 25 years in my mind. Every family dinner, every anniversary, every late-night conversation with Linda, trying to figure out when things had gone wrong. The truth was a slow, suffocating weight on my chest. This wasn't just an affair. It was something darker, something more deliberate. The level of planning involved, the fact that my own daughter had been complicit, it felt almost surreal. I didn't know whether to scream or cry, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. Not anymore. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I wasn't in the mood to fake smiles and pretend everything was okay. Linda was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee in silence. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Emily had already left the house, probably to avoid another confrontation. We need to finish this conversation, I said, sitting down across from her. No more half-truths, no more lies. I want everything on the table. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she set her coffee cup down. Ask me whatever you want, she said quietly. Fine, I said, leaning forward. Let's start with the basics. How long has this really been going on? She took a deep breath. We reconnected a little over a year ago, she said. But we knew each other before we got married. He was someone I dated seriously in my 20s. I thought I'd moved on from him, but when we ran into each other again, it felt like no time had passed. It was like all those old feelings came rushing back. And you just decided to throw away 25 years of marriage for a guy from your past? I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. It wasn't like that, she said, shaking her head. It wasn't about throwing anything away. First, I just wanted to catch up, to see how he was doing. But one meeting turned into two, then three, and before I knew it, we were in too deep. And Emily? I asked, my voice hardening. How did she get involved? Linda hesitated, glancing toward the window. She found out by accident. She saw a text from him on my phone and confronted me. I begged her not to tell you. I told her it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. She believed me at first. But then, when it kept happening, she started helping me cover it up. Why would she do that? I demanded. Why would she risk destroying our family for you? Linda's eyes filled with tears. Because she thought she was protecting me. She thought she was helping me find happiness again. She didn't want to see me miserable. Protecting you? I repeated, my voice rising. What about protecting me? What about protecting this family? Linda had no answer for that. She just looked down at her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. By the time Emily came home later that afternoon, I was ready for round 2. I met her at the door, blocking her path. We need to talk. Now, she sighed, brushing past me into the living room. I already told you everything, Dad. What more do you want? I want the truth, I said, my voice sharp. The real truth, not the carefully edited version you've been feeding me. Emily crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. You wouldn't understand, she said, her tone defiant. You've always been so black and white about everything. Life's more complicated than that. Don't give me that life is complicated crap, I snapped. This isn't some gray area. You helped your mother cheat on me. You lied to my face for months. How do you expect me to understand that? For a moment, I thought she was going to argue again. But then, something in her eyes shifted. The defiance melted away, replaced by something that looked like regret, or maybe exhaustion. You're right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I screwed up. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I stared at her, trying to process her sudden change in tone. Why? I asked. Why go to such lengths to cover for her? Emily looked away, her jaw tightening. Because I didn't want to lose her, she said. She's been so distant for years, and when she reconnected with JS, it was like I finally got her back. I thought if I helped her, she'd stay happy. She wouldn't leave again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been so focused on my own pain that I hadn't even considered how this mess might have affected Emily. You thought she was going to leave? I asked, my voice softening. She always talked about how she felt trapped, Emily said. How she missed the life she had before. I thought, if I helped her have a little freedom, she wouldn't feel that way anymore. I sank into the nearest chair, running my hands through my hair. This wasn't the explanation I'd expected. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it gave me a glimpse into the complicated, messy web of emotions that had driven her actions. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I didn't have the energy for another confrontation, and Linda retreated to the bedroom without saying a word. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering light from the TV, trying to piece together a plan. I couldn't just let this slide. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. But I also couldn't deny that I still loved Linda, despite everything. The question was, could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? And what about Emily? Could we rebuild our relationship after everything that had happened? I didn't know the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body was exhausted, but my mind had been running in overdrive all night, cycling through everything Linda and Emily had told me. I needed clarity, answers that would fill in the gaps they were carefully avoiding. Linda left early, claiming she had errands to run. She didn't offer any details, and I didn't ask for any. But I knew I couldn't sit back and wait for more lies to pile up. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started by digging deeper into JS. His name was surprisingly difficult to track down online. No social media presence, no obvious job listings. It was strange, like he was a ghost. But after some determined searching, I found an old news article from about 20 years ago. It was a small piece in the local paper, something most people wouldn't think twice about. The headline read, Local businessman under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. I stared at the grainy black and white photo of the man in the article. It was him, JS. According to the article, he had been running a shady investment scheme for years before the authorities caught on. He was never officially charged. Some technicality kept the case from moving forward, but the damage had been done. His business collapsed and he disappeared from public view. My hands clenched into fists. This was the man Linda had reconnected with?
¿A con artist?
I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the article for more information. Then something else caught my eye, something that made my stomach drop. One of the key investors who lost money in JS's scheme, Linda's father. It hit me like a freight train. This wasn't some random old flame from her past. This was personal. I sat back, trying to piece it all together. Linda's father had never talked much about his finances, but I knew he had lost a significant amount of money late in life. I always assumed it was due to a bad investment or the stock market, but now it all made sense. JS wasn't just some ex-boyfriend. He was the man who had ruined her family. Why the hell would she get involved with him again? I needed answers, and I needed them now. When Linda came home later that afternoon, I was waiting for her in the living room. "Hey," she said cautiously, setting her purse down. "You're home early. We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. Her eyes flickered with nervousness. "About what?" I pulled up the article on my phone and handed it to her. "About him." Linda's face went pale as she read the headline. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that you explain why you're back in contact with the man who destroyed your family's finances. Why are you with him, Linda? What the hell is going on?" She sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling. "It's complicated," she said, her voice cracking. "Uncomplicate it," I said. "I deserve the truth." Linda took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. "When I ran into him last year, I wasn't looking for anything. It just happened. He was different, softer, more remorseful. He told me he regretted everything he'd done, that he was trying to turn his life around. I believed him. I thought maybe we could start fresh." "Start fresh," I said, incredulous. "With the man who ruined your father? You didn't think that was worth mentioning." "I didn't want to drag up old wounds," she said, wiping her eyes. "I thought I could handle it. I thought it would be different this time." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You thought you could handle it? So you just lied to me for a year and roped our daughter into your mess?" "I didn't mean for it to get so out of hand," she said. "But once it started, I couldn't stop. I was in too deep. The room felt like it was closing in on me." I stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to wrap my head around everything. "I can't do this," I said finally. "I can't keep living like this, wondering what other secrets you're hiding." Linda looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "I'm not hiding anything else, I swear. Please, we can work through this." "I don't know if we can," I said, my voice trembling. "You've betrayed my trust in ways I didn't think were possible. You let him back into your life, into our family's life, without even thinking about what that would do to me, or to Emily. I was selfish," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was lost, and I made terrible choices. But I love you. I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly. Funny way of showing it. The conversation ended in silence. Linda retreated to the bedroom again, leaving me alone in the living room with my thoughts. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, each path darker than the last. I could try to forgive her, try to rebuild what we had. But that seemed impossible now. There were too many lies, too much damage. Or I could walk away, cut my losses and start fresh on my own. Neither option felt right. Neither option felt like it would ever lead to peace. By Monday morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of Linda's lies any longer. If I was going to move forward, if it had to start with the truth no matter how ugly it was. The problem was, I couldn't trust anything Linda said anymore. Her version of the truth was so tangled with half-lies and omissions that it was impossible to separate reality from fiction. So I decided to go straight to the source. I called the number I found for JS in one of the emails. My heart pounded as it rang, each second feeling heavier than the last. I half expected him not to answer. But then, a voice I instantly recognized came through the line. "Hello!" For a second, I couldn't speak. Hearing his voice made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This is John," I said, my voice steady. "Linda's husband." There was a long pause on the other end. "Well, this is a surprise," JS said finally, his tone casual, too casual. "What can I do for you?" "I think you know exactly why I'm calling," I said. "We need to talk. Face to face." Another pause. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "Too bad." I shot back. "You owe me that much. Unless you want me to start making some noise about what you've been up to." He sighed. "Fine. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street. 1 hour. I got there early and grabbed a seat in the back corner. My eyes scanned the room constantly, my nerves on edge. Then, right on time, JS walked in. He was taller than I had expected, with a confident stride and a smug expression that made me want to punch him in the face on the spot. He spotted me immediately and made his way over, sitting across from me without a word. "You've got guts," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I'll give you that." "Cut the crap," I said. "You've been messing with my family for long enough. I want to know why." He raised an eyebrow. "Why? Isn't it obvious? I care about Linda. We have history. When we reconnected, it just felt natural." "Natural," I repeated, my voice rising. "You conned her father out of his savings, and now you've wormed your way back into her life? What the hell is natural about that?" JS chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about money or revenge. It's about something much deeper." "Then enlighten me," I said through gritted teeth. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Linda came to me, not the other way around. She found me after all these years because she needed an escape. She was drowning in your perfect little life, and I offered her a way out." I clenched my fists under the table. "You offered her a lie, just like you always have." JS smirked. "Call it what you want, but I'm not the one who made her unhappy. That was all you." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Stay the hell away from my family," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "If I see you near her or my daughter again, you'll regret it." His smile didn't waver. "We'll see," he said calmly. I walked out of the coffee shop, my heart pounding in my chest. The conversation had left me feeling more confused and angry than ever. But one thing was clear, JS wasn't going to disappear quietly. When I got home, Linda was waiting for me in the living room. She looked anxious, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Where were you?" she asked. "Talking to him," I said. Her face paled. You talked to JS?" "Yes," I said, crossing my arms. "And he told me everything. How you came to him. How you dragged our daughter into your mess because you were too scared to face your own problems." Linda covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I was lost and I made mistakes, but I never wanted to hurt you. I still love you, John. I always have." I shook my head, my heart aching with a mix of love and betrayal. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said. "You wouldn't have lied to me for a year. You wouldn't have made our daughter complicit in your betrayal." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her fall apart. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her that we could get through this. But the other part of me knew that things would never be the same again. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, love, regret. I had no idea what the future held. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house felt like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Every conversation was loaded with tension. Every glance filled with suspicion. Even the air seemed heavier, like it knew the weight of the secrets that had been exposed. I couldn't avoid Linda and Emily forever, but I needed space to think, to breathe. So, I packed a small bag and left for a few days, staying at a friend's place while I tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Linda called me dozens of times, leaving voicemails that started with apologies and ended with desperate pleas for me to come home. Emily sent a few texts, short and cautious, testing the waters. Emily, Dad, are you okay? I ignored most of them, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't trust myself to respond without saying something I'd regret. By the third day, I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. It was time to go back and face the wreckage. When I walked through the door, Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when she saw me, relief washing over her face. "Dad," she said, standing up. "You're back." "Yeah," I said, closing the door behind me. "We need to talk." She nodded, sitting back down, her expression serious. "I know. I've been thinking about everything, and
I'm sorry.
for everything, for lying to you, for covering for Mom. I thought I was helping, but I realize now that I was just making things worse." I sat down across from her, taking a deep breath. "I need you to be honest with me from now on. No more secrets. No more protecting your mom at my expense. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I promise." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could rebuild our relationship. Maybe we could find a way to move forward. Then Linda walked into the room, and the fragile peace shattered. She stood in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "John," she said softly, "can we talk?" I glanced at Emily, who nodded and stood up, giving us space. "I'll be in my room," she said, disappearing down the hall. Linda sat down next to me, her hands trembling. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, "and I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." Her voice cracked, and tears streamed down her face. "I know it'll take time, but can we try to fix this? Can we start over?" I looked at her, my heart aching with a mix of love and pain. For a split second, I imagined what it would be like to forgive her, to rebuild our life from the ashes. But then I thought about all the lies, all the betrayals. The image of her wrapped in JS's arms flashed in my mind, and the illusion of a fresh start crumbled. "I don't know if I can," I said, my voice trembling. "Too much has happened. Too many lies." Linda reached for my hand, desperation in her eyes. "Please, John, we can go to counseling. We can work through this." I pulled my hand away, standing up. "Maybe you should have thought about that a year ago," I said, my voice cold. The rest of the night passed in silence. I retreated to the guest room, staring at the ceiling until the early hours of the morning. My mind was a battlefield, torn between love and betrayal, between hope and reality. When I finally drifted off to sleep, I dreamed of the life we used to have, the laughter, the love, the sense of security that had once felt so unshakable. I woke up feeling like I'd lost something I could never get back. By the next morning, I knew what I had to do. Linda and I sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of the moment hanging between us. "I've thought about this a lot," I said, my voice steady, "and I think the best thing for both of us is to separate." Linda's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, please, John. We can fix this." "I don't think we can," I said gently. "There's too much damage, too many broken pieces. Maybe someday we can find a way to be friends. But right now I need space to heal." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock, counting down the end of our marriage. Finally, Linda nodded, wiping her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "If that's what you need, I'll respect it." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and difficult conversations. We told Emily first, explaining that we were separating but still committed to being there for her. She took it surprisingly well, better than I expected. Maybe she had seen this coming long before I had. We didn't tell many people at first. The story was too complicated, too raw. I wasn't ready to answer the inevitable questions or deal with the pitying looks from friends and family. Instead, I focused on taking things one day at a time. The day Linda moved out was gray and quiet. Fitting, I thought. No dramatic goodbyes, no emotional last words. Just the sound of boxes being carried out the front door and the soft hum of her car as it disappeared down the street. I watched from the window, my chest tight, waiting for a wave of relief that never came. I expected to feel lighter, freer somehow. Instead, all I felt was a deep, aching emptiness. The kind of emptiness that comes when you finally accept that something you believed in for so long was a lie. The house felt cavernous without her. The echoes of our life together lingered in every room. Photos on the walls, the faint scent of her favorite perfume clinging to the furniture. Even the kitchen seemed haunted by memories of late-night conversations over coffee and stolen moments of laughter. I knew I had to get out of that house. Staying there would only prolong the pain. I spent the next few weeks looking for a new place. Something smaller, simpler, a fresh start. Emily helped me pack, her presence a surprising comfort. We didn't talk much about what had happened. There was no need. She seemed determined to rebuild our relationship in her own quiet way, and I was grateful for that. "Dad," she said one afternoon while we were packing up the living room. "I know things have been hard lately, but I'm really proud of you." I looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For standing up for yourself," she said. "For not letting this break you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thanks, kiddo. That means a lot." I found a modest apartment on the edge of town. A 2-bedroom with just enough space for me and the occasional visit from Emily. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night there, I sat on the balcony with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to exhale. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It was peaceful. I started focusing on things I'd neglected for years: my health, my hobbies, my friends. I went back to the gym, picked up photography again, and even signed up for a woodworking class. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. Linda and I kept things civil. We spoke occasionally, mostly about logistics or updates on Emily. There was no animosity, just a quiet understanding that we had both made mistakes and that it was time to move on. One afternoon, a few months after she moved out, she called me out of the blue. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "I'm good," I said honestly. "Better, actually." "I'm glad," she said. There was a pause, then, "You seem lighter." "I am," I admitted. "It's been hard, but I'm finding my way." "Me too," she said. "I'm in therapy, working through a lot of stuff." "That's good," I said, meaning it. "I hope it helps." We talked for a little while longer. Nothing too deep, just a conversation between two people who had once shared a life and were now learning how to live apart. When we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure exactly, but a step toward it. As the months turned into a year, the pain of what had happened began to dull. It never disappeared entirely. Wounds like that leave scars, but it stopped defining me. I learned to laugh again, to find joy in the little things. I reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, and discovered parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of a failing marriage. For the first time in a long time, I felt like me again. One night, about a year after Linda and I separated, I found myself sitting on the same balcony with a glass of whiskey. The city lights sparkled below, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees nearby. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak. And then, I thought about everything that had come after. Growth, strength, freedom. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine. I raised my glass to the night sky, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "To new beginnings," I whispered. "The end."